And that's one of the things, Batya, you say very strongly in the book, which is when you look at the concerns of minorities, of blacks and Hispanic communities, they are nowhere near as concerned about race as privileged white elites.
Yeah.
You make a powerful point at the beginning of the book where you talk about the consensus model of the media. And it's certainly been argued for a long time that a progressive mainstream media is necessary to mediate community debate and build consensus. But you make the point that, in fact, this notion of consensus was very short-lived and that it was not the media creating that consensus. It was the media reflecting a consensus that existed in society that no longer exists. And I'll just read out a few comments, because what you say is very powerful and it's new to the debate. And you say, the consensus that allowed Americans with different values and political orientations to get their news from a shared source was in fact kept alive, not so much by a political agreement as by an economic reality. The 2 decades between the mid-40s and the mid-60s were a time of buoyant social mobility. Working class wages rose steadily and significantly, so much so, and this is a lovely phrase, so much so that the very idea of working class was almost an anachronism, given how little distinguished the working class from the middle class were from even the rich. And you talk about how class interests were the same, passions were the same, values were the same, people drove the same sorts of cars and engaged in the same sorts of pastimes. That's now changed. Can you talk about that consensus model that we once aspired to and the fact that it didn't even exist?
Yeah, we like to look back fondly on the Walter Cronkite era as like, oh, conservatives and liberals got their news from the same place. But it wasn't because he was speaking to the middle politically. It's because there was so much economic mobility in the United States at the time that people did not see themselves as part of different strata. And so they could get their news from the same source because he was speaking to people from all economic strata. And it was not insane to think that a guy who drove a pickup truck and was a plumber would have the same interest as, a lawyer living, in maybe a much nicer neighborhood, but they were just not so astronomically different. Whereas you look at America today and the top 10% owns over 50% of all of the wealth of the country. We focus so much on the 1%. But it's really the 10%, right, that see themselves as like the good guys. They see themselves as on the side of the little guy when actually they are living lives that are unimaginable to the vast majority of Americans who are downwardly mobile because of things like globalization, things that were enabled by both parties, right, by this handshake agreement by both parties. And so I think that is a really important point. Partisan media, we often act like the thing that distinguishes our media is like there's the liberal echo chamber and the conservative echo chamber. But, as somebody who, as part of my job as a Newsweek opinion editor, is to watch Fox News and CNN all day long, I can tell you the thing that distinguishes them is not politics, it's class. That's the number one thing that distinguishes them. The CNN host is imagining a viewer with a college education and the Fox News host is not. That's it. And that distinction is growing, and it has so many ramifications at this point. If you don't have a college degree, not only are you not going to make as much money, not only are you not going to increasingly be able to afford a house, your health outcomes are worse. Your likelihood to be obese is much higher. Your likelihood to die of COVID is much higher. Your likelihood to die of an opioid addiction is much higher. I mean, your children's downward mobility is a foregone conclusion. And so that to me is the thing that we're missing. We use race and we use partisanship and politics to distract from the real divide because it lets us off the hook.